kids trying to sneak in here and jump off the stage. I apologize for all of the precedents that I have set. I'm going to invite our special guest, Michael Jones, to come up on stage now. Can everyone give him a welcome round of applause? Good to see. Well, Michael has journeyed all the way from a very small, unheard of part of the world known as the United States of America.
Yeah, we're just a small little country that
doesn't have much impact on geopolitical affairs or anything like that.
Probably never heard of it or anything like that.
He was a little bit worried that he wasn't allowed to get into Australia because he hadn't committed a crime. Apparently that used to be the required entry, but we really appreciate you exporting freedom to every part of the world.
You're welcome. That's what we do. We give you guys freedom and we take your oil.
Yes, it's some kind of trade. There's more truth to that than you might actually think. So Michael, for those of you who haven't seen him before, is what we like to call YouTube famous. So there's, since 2011, Michael started a YouTube channel called Inspiring Philosophy that has been enormously helpful in letting a lot of younger people on YouTube and then more recently TikTok wrestle with a lot of the bigger questions and objections when it comes to Christianity. And he's here today to be able to give a bit of a window into some of the answers to many of the most difficult objections, doubts, and questions that really are very popular in our culture right now. But before we jump into that, why don't you tell us some of your best experiences from being in Australia for the last 4 or 5 days? Vegemite?
Let's not get carried away.
Yeah.
I did try it. I'm sorry. I'm not a fan. I did try it, though, so that's the best I can do.
Yeah,
but
we appreciate that.
Sorry if I'm a little low energy. It's nothing against you. I did not adjust to the time zone change as well. Keep waking up in the middle of the night. So I'm just tired, I promise. I'm fine. But it's been very interesting. I've enjoyed seeing some of the wildlife for sure. I'm always interested in that kind of stuff. Very, very friendly people here for sure. I appreciate that as well.
He's going to go to an AFL game this afternoon between Melbourne and Brisbane, so he'll get to see a little bit more of the aggression of Aussies playing out with the fandom there, no doubt. He has lay down with kangaroos, he's patted koalas, he's tried a Tim Tam Slam, very important. He's had a humble meat pie, so we're giving him the full Aussie experience. If you've got some other suggestions for his last couple of days here, feel free to put them in. But let me start with this. So you started your channel called Inspiring Philosophy. We often know what inspiring is, but a lot of people haven't spent much time wrestling with formal philosophy. Give us a window into how does philosophy fit with Christianity? Because a lot of people might think, look, faith and reason, they're not exactly friends. Religious thinkers are often considered to be kind of an oxymoron. If you're religious, you don't think. You're anti-intellectual, you're lazy. It's for believing just by blind faith rather than anything intellectual. What made you choose philosophy as part of the title, and what relationship does faith have to reason?
Well, philosophy is really the basis of all wisdom. Before you can do science, you have to do philosophy. Before you can do anything. Everyone does philosophy to some degree in any sort of folk understanding of it. So we all are asking simple questions like, why am I here? What does this all mean? What is our purpose? Those are all philosophical questions. And so Christianity is very much a philosophical religion because it's asking those kinds of questions and it's providing answers. And so Christianity is an inspiring philosophy because it doesn't just answer those questions, it has motivated us to become far better versions of ourselves.
In the last couple of years, there's been a bit of a shift in kind of cultural trends. It seemed to be that much of Western culture was moving towards a harder secular edge and kind of abandoning the God story and happy to leave that behind. But it seems to be this quiet revival that's taking place and been noticed by sociologists and religious thinkers. What do you think is driving that turn back to explore God again, and the first growth in church numbers we've seen in places like the UK, and the explosion of our common friend Wes Huff onto sort of the internet stage with Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz and all of these other huge platforms that now it seems like everyone's talking about Jesus and the Bible. What's driving that, do you think?
I think there's a lot of factors driving that. For one, I think we were told, I'm sure you guys here, especially in Australia, were told 3 decades ago or so, is that religion is old news. It's now time to move into the modern era. Let's leave behind superstitions, magic sky daddies. We don't need any more of that. It's now time to move into the new era of reason and enlightenment, and then we'll enter the era of sci-fi technology happening. And so we were sort of told that. That turned out to be a total lie. People over the past decade or so have been asking questions like, is this all there really is? Why should I continue? Why should I be motivated to make the world a better place? Are we really just biological machines focused on ourselves? And so it's left a lot of deep questions that people needed answered. And so a secular world is unable to provide those answers. It essentially says, you're just a collection of cells. You'll be here for about 70 to 80 years. So enjoy what little time you have and then die and you will be out of existence. And most people hear that and that is not a very fulfilling and nice message to think about.
It's not an inspiring philosophy.
No, it's a horrible thought. And so we were sort of promised this age of enlightenment and reason, and we haven't really gotten that. Instead, we're seeing people sort of like leave Christianity or traditional religiosity, and they move into New Age beliefs, they move into a lot of superstitious ideas, or they get extremely nihilistic or depressed. And so people are starting to go, well, maybe this wasn't really what we thought it was. Maybe there was something that our ancestors knew, that our elders knew, that we need to get back to. Because Christianity did build the West as we have now, and it is a very important foundation, and I don't think we can really survive without it. So I think people are starting to come to that realization, and they're starting to seek and figure out ways or processes of what we can go through. Do we need to return to Christianity, or do we need to build something different? But somewhere in there, religiosity and spirituality need to be there.
You've debated some of the world's leading atheist voices, at least the high-profile, aggressive ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you've other religious thinkers as well. People can go and check. There's dozens of debates online on various channels and public forums that have been posted up there. What would you say is the current state of the case for God? If someone's here is like, yeah, you know what, that's why I'm here. I kind of feel like maybe there's something more, but am I actually really allowed to believe this? Like maybe I want something to be real, but can I genuinely accept it intellectually? What do you think the state of the case for God is?
To answer your question, yes. So it's actually, the case for God has gotten far better over the past few decades, not because of, we've made new advanced discoveries. It's that we have been sort of forced into a corner as Christians to defend our worldview. And so all sorts of new apologetic ministries like ours have come about to offer those. So there's a whole ton of new material. It's ironic, a lot of the new atheists thought they were destroying religion. They ended up just creating a more fortified Christianity. It's like you go back and you study like the Viking invasions of Europe. They thought they were going to pillage the entire continent, and they ended up just creating an entire continent of fortified cities, knights, more advanced armor, and it's sort of what has happened to Christians now. They're becoming more well-equipped, and they're getting more of the information out there. So a lot of the data has been there, but then a lot of Christian philosophers like Alvin Plantinga, Richard Swinburne, William Lane Craig started publishing more material, taking things like old arguments for God's existence people had not heard of, like Kalam cosmological argument, the ontological argument, making them more mainstream, more palpable, easier to understand, getting a lot of the information out there. So they've actually just made a more fortified Christianity. Sure, we've lost some numbers, but now we're more well-equipped to go get them back.
A lot of Australians maybe aren't as engaged in the religious debate. Most of them are not angry atheists. They're what I've often termed apatheists. They're more apathetic to the God stuff because life in Australia can be pretty decent. You think, why bother with the whole God stuff? What would you say to someone who might be sitting here and saying, it looks like a lot of work. You're talking about ideas and thinking and wrestling, and why should I bother even thinking about God?
Yeah, I don't think people can stay in that state for long. Everyone goes through a dark night of the soul or about where they start to question these things. I don't think humans are just apathetic creatures by nature. We go through phases of apathy, but everyone is going to come to that point in their life where they start to wrestle with these kinds of questions and wonder, what is all this for? And so when you get to that, what is your answer going to be? We see this rise of secularism, depression rates increase, suicide rates increase. There was a study done in Switzerland, and the atheist suicide rate was like twice the number of Catholics. And so that's a horrible thing to think about. And so we need to think about these questions because they are important to our souls, to our human psychology. And so we need to start to wrestle with those. And so we as Christians need to get people to realize those questions need to be answered before they get in a position where they're going through a hard time, and then the questions come up and they can end up in a very dark place. So we as Christians need to go out and get people thinking about them now so that we can prevent a lot of very bad things from happening.
For the last maybe 12 months, you've been doing a bunch of debates around kind of the social impact of Christianity. And maybe one of the key voices from the new atheists was, well, religion is the problem in the world. It causes all the wars, it causes the social division and this polarization. Religion poisons everything. What would you say maybe would positively motivate people to think, actually, no, maybe Christianity is good for me? Maybe a belief in God and following Jesus actually results in the right kind of person that I want to become. What's some of that evidence that you would want to give people to think about?
Yeah, do we have like 3 hours? Yeah.
Well, you've got maybe 3 minutes on this one, and they can watch your YouTube for the rest.
Yeah. If you study from a historical perspective, you go back to the ancient Roman world, slavery was normal, rampant sexual immorality. They didn't have scientific developments. And we see a lot of that coming out of the Christian tradition. So we're often told that Christians are at war with science. Well, historians like Noah J. Ephron, Edward Grant, Toby E. Huff, James Hannam will tell you that Christianity was crucial for the development of science. Specific Christian doctrines, like to give you one example, like atheists like to say that Christianity is mean because we tell people that we are depraved because of sin. That's horrible. How could you teach children that? Well, the funny thing is that a lot of early Greek philosophers didn't develop a scientific method because they lacked that specific doctrine. In the Middle Ages, we had a robust understanding of original sin, and so what happened is they started to develop this idea of a scientific method. If I'm flawed as a human, I need to do repeated experimentation to verify results so that we can know that this is true. Well, the scientific method came out of that. So science built the technological world we live in. So you like modern medical technology, you like modern astronomy, you like modern transportation, smart devices, thank Christianity. I mean, that's not even debated among historians of science. That's just the fact. And what they discuss is how much did Christianity help? Was it moderate or was it a lot? That's really where the debate is. You can think about like just modern human rights. The ancient world didn't have human rights, and don't bring up the Cyrus cylinder. That's nonsense. Human rights comes out of the Christian tradition mostly. So like the ancient Romans thought that barbarians didn't deserve the same rights. They should be enslaved. Christians said, well, no, everyone is a child of God. Therefore, we should have human rights. Women's rights, okay? In the ancient Roman world, women, you were the property of your husband, your father, or the next of male kin. And that you were to be given away to someone in marriage to strengthen alliances between families or nations. Well, in the Middle Ages, the church started preaching romance. Women have inherent rights from their creator, therefore they get to choose who they want to marry. So they started marrying couples in private. This is where the idea of witnesses comes out of. Because they would marry a couple and the fathers would say, well, I don't have any evidence of this. So the priest started authorizing marriages, and they'd have witnesses there to verify because women had inherent rights. So most of the things we take for granted are coming out of the Christian tradition. What do you think would happen if we started to move away from that? Okay, it's going to have devastating consequences, and we're just starting to see the beginnings of that, which is terrifying, but I suspect a pretty quick reversal in the next 2 decades.
There may be a number of people here that are relatively new to exploring Christianity, and before we jump into the kind of doubts and objections that are really common, and we're going to tackle a bunch of them, maybe something more positively. You may have seen with the illustration, it was when my boys saw me that I was going to catch them, and they knew who I was, that they were willing to trust and jump. For a lot of people, it's hard to say yes to God and Jesus until they kind of see his character, and that seems to be wrapped up with this guy Jesus in the Bible. He's the clearest revelation of what God's like. He's the invisible God made visible. So a positive step for people would be to maybe start reading the Gospels about Jesus and see who he is and what he said and what he calls us to believe in response to that. But many people may have heard, yeah, but why would you trust these ancient documents? Like, these are things that have been changed by political figures and translated and edited, and how do we even know that what was originally written, the people were there and aren't just making up these stories as legends? Just maybe a window into just one or two things. It's like, no, you really need to take these Gospels seriously as reliable historical documents.
Yeah, well, first, there's no evidence of changes to essential Christian doctrines in manuscripts. If you've heard myths about Constantine changing the Bible, anything like that, that's nonsense. Our earliest manuscripts, as scholars like Dan Wallace and Darrell Bach will tell you, confirm essential Christian doctrines. So there's nothing in the manuscript traditions that threaten. Most of the changes you see in manuscripts are spelling errors, changes in grammar, stuff like that. There's no evidence of any changes from scribes that changed entire doctrines. No evidence of that. Well, how do we know they didn't make up stories when the Gospels were being written? Well, there's a lot of little historical tells that show us that's not the case. So, for example, the early church was really trying to struggle in a world that was persecuting and oppressing them. So there was an early Christian opponent named Celsus, and he wrote an entire treatise attacking Christianity. And one of his arguments against the truth of Christianity was that you can't believe this. I mean, you think there was a resurrection? No, no one can trust that. That tomb was discovered by women. And we all know in the ancient Roman world, the testimony of women is not reliable. So what do all the Gospels say? Who was the first to discover the empty tomb? It was women. That was incredibly embarrassing for them. They didn't want to admit that to the wider Greco-Roman world because they didn't trust the testimony of women. So they were including details that were embarrassing to them that we miss because we obviously treat women like equals in today's world, thanks a lot to Christianity. But in that world, that was a way they would mock them. We know about the story of Simon Peter betraying Jesus. Well, he was one of the main leaders in the early church. And atheist scholar like Gerd Ludemann would say, no early Christian would have made that up. No one would. This is Jesus betraying almost to the level that Judas did his own master. So this had
Peter
to be
betraying Jesus, yeah.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, Peter. So therefore, no one would have made this up. So they would include stories like that because they were interested in telling the truth. They included things they had a hard time understanding. Like Jesus says in Matthew 13, no man knoweth the hour, not even the Son. Okay, early Christians had to wrestle with that, but they included it in there. And there's good explanations church fathers like St. Basil presented that answer those. But it was a struggle for a lot of people, and it was used against the Christians early on. But they included that kind of stuff because they were interested in reporting facts. They would include details that you could only know if you were there on the ground. So think of the storms on the Sea of Galilee. Early Christian opponent Porphyry mocked the Gospels because he's like, violent storms would not happen in a little lake like that. Well, modern meteorological research shows that, yes, they in fact do. Very violent storms with winds that are like 80 kilometers or more, like very fast. So that kind of stuff. If you read the Gospel of John, it says that when Jesus died, blood and water came out of his side when the spear went through him. And early Christians like Origen were like, well, that doesn't happen. When the heart stops, the blood congeals in the body. If you cut a dead body, blood is not supposed to pour out. So they were like, well, that had to be some sort of miracle. Well, modern medical research has noted that if you die from shock and severe beating, the body's ability to congeal blood stops. The proteins break down. So blood and water would have poured out of a body that was severely beaten and tortured just before death. That was something that they wrestled with. But so they're reporting facts. And by the way, there's like a book. There's several books on this. But you look at a book like Craig Blomberg's book, The Historical Reliability of John's Gospel. I mean, it's just page after. He goes through every chapter and is like, yeah, they wouldn't have made this up. This is confirmed historically. This is confirmed historically. And you're talking about like what is it, like 60-some facts in just John that he gets right. It's incredible. That's the kind of stuff forgers could never have come up with.
Really helpful. Well, let's spend just some time before we close on some of the objections and doubts that would be really common. It's impossible to live long in the world without bumping into an experience that you're like, man, this just doesn't feel like what a loving and powerful God would let happen. That this world is broken, people are hurting, there is evil. How do we reconcile that with the idea that God exists and that he's not intervening? How do you make sense of the problem of evil?
Yeah, the problem of evil, of course, is going to be the biggest objection to Christianity. And we always say, like, well, why would God allow a world with evil if he truly loves us? I mean, I would say, in some sense, we need to take a step back and ask, what are we asking God to do? Do we really want to live in a world without evil? And people, your knee-jerk reaction is going to be yes. So then let me ask you a simple question. And I use this analogy a lot. Dan has heard it, so I'm going to use it again. Okay? What if I told you for the next 5 hours you're stuck in this room and you have to watch season 1 of the Teletubbies? Yeah, I know you're excited. Or Dan is going to take people into another room, and instead, if you choose, you can go watch The Lord of the Rings instead. How many of you are staying here with me to watch Teletubbies? How many of you are going with Dan?
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You mean to tell me you just chose a world of evil and suffering? You don't want to live in a world. See, people vote with their feet more than anything. And the way the books we read, the movies we watch, it always contains worlds with suffering. But it's not just that. It's worlds that are suffering and evil or defeated. We recognize those are the best types of possible worlds because they produce the greatest character, the greatest amount of virtues. Who is more interesting, for example, to use Lord of the Rings? Frodo, who just lives in the Shire his whole life and gets really good at making tea? Or Frodo, who goes to Mount Doom, almost dies, saves the world, and then becomes a far better version? Who would you rather be? The one who went through the suffering and became one who truly knows good and evil, or one who stays spoiled and lives in the Shire? Who would you rather be? Tony Stark, Iron Man, who is a playboy billionaire, or Tony Stark, who saves the universe and sacrifices himself at the end of the movies for his love for his family and humanity? We recognize that when we go through evil and suffering, it produces the greatest virtues. You can't experience courage unless there's something to be afraid of. You can't experience compassion if there's no compassion that ever needs to be given. So if God is like that, he's going to want to create a world where he can produce the greatest amount of virtues, the greatest types of souls that are worthy to judge angels one day. And so he's got to create a world where there's going to be the allowance of evil and suffering so that it can be defeated and triumphed over. Because the best type of world is the world where there is triumph. But you don't have triumph, there's not something that's defeated. So what would we expect God to do? In fact, I would argue evil and suffering is expected if Christianity is true.
There's a lot more to unpack with that one, but just a couple of thoughts with all these sorts of questions just to begin the journey. And Mike and myself, we have hundreds of videos on these sorts of topics that are worth checking out to dive in deeper. Particularly on that one, I've got a 2-hour interview with 2 Oxford philosophers wandering through a dozen different explanations to the problem of evil. It might be helpful to check that one out. What do people do when they're reading the Bible and they come across things that they really struggle to accept could be part of God's story? So think in the Old Testament, there are stories of war and of judgment. There are stories where, commands where you see permission given towards institutions like slavery and the Torah, and people are like, oh, I'm meant to believe that this comes from God in some way to be a light towards his people at that time. How could this really fit with the character of God? What do you do personally, and in those moments, what would you encourage people to do to wrestle with those stories and understand where they fit? Yeah,
let's talk a little bit about history. So when the British had conquered India, they started to push reforms on the Indians at the time. And they were going to be incredibly radical. They said, no more are you allowed to burn widows alive. You're also not allowed to marry girls that are 12 and under. Okay? And they rioted. They rioted in India. The Muslims and the Hindus, they said, no, we are allowed to do these things. There's a great line by one guy who went to the governor, and he's like, you have to let us burn widows, because that was part of a lot of Hindu traditions, is when the man died, the woman had to be burned alive. Really evil, obviously. And they were complaining, and one of the British governors had a great line, and because the Indian came to him, and he said, you're taking away our sacred traditions, how dare you? He said, well, in our country, we have a tradition where we hang people who burn widows. You keep your tradition, and we'll keep ours. Oh, that's a great story, but it's kind of like an interesting point there. It's these were very obvious things not to do to us, and it created riots in the country. Okay, now look at God. Okay, he's working with sinful, horrible people. Okay? Oftentimes, America, we like to go to the Middle East and spread democracy, and then in 10 years, it's back to a dictatorship. It just doesn't work with some people because they're not morally there yet. God is working with people in the past who believed many horrible things. Okay? He's not going to remove free will. He wants to work with people to get them to a better place. So this is what Jesus tells us in Matthew 19. They come to him about the law of divorce, and he says, I didn't want that. The law of divorce was given because your hearts were hard. That's not how it was meant to be in the beginning. Same with a lot of the Old Testament stuff, okay? God said, dealing with stiff-necked people, his words, not mine, dealing with people that have a hard time following the laws I get them. I just can't get them the best place ever. We have to use incremental steps to get them to a better place. I mean, he told them, listen, if God appeared to you as a pillar of fire and said, stop worshiping a golden calf, do you think you'd have a hard time doing that? Well, the Israelites did. We're talking about people where they were culturally at the time with the knowledge they had. It took a while. The moment the Exodus and the conquest end, they immediately, in the book of Judges, go back to worshiping idols. They couldn't keep the little laws they were given. You think they could have understood things like slavery fully, human rights, these kinds of things? They just weren't there yet. This is the story of Scripture. God is slowly progressing us to a better place. We're still in that process.
All right, lots to come and ask him about in the aftermath, I'm sure. I want to do two more, and then we'll close the service and give you the opportunity to keep asking questions and chatting afterwards. Maybe one of the most difficult things that people wrestle with is actually at the end of the Bible, and it's this idea of God bringing about judgment to set all things right. And there's a lot of questions that brings up around, but what about people who have never heard? Is it really just that God judges in that way? It's a question around what is hell? Can that fit with a loving God? There's a ton there, but I'd just love you to pick up maybe on that idea of judgment. What is it about this idea of judgment that makes you go, you know what, I know there's a lot of unanswered questions you wrestle with, but here's why I think you should see this judgment as something to be received?
Yeah, if God is perfectly just and omniscient and perfectly loving, then he will judge properly. There's not going to be any injustice. C.S. Lewis said, honest rejection of Christ, however wrong, shall be forgiven and healed. That's in his paper, Man or Rabbit. So God is perfectly just, perfectly loving, perfectly merciful, and omniscient. He will judge properly. People that go to hell do not go there against their will. You know, if you read Paradise Lost by John Milton, Satan in the play says it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. That's the mentality of hell. C.S. Lewis said the doors of hell are locked from the inside. So no one goes to hell who doesn't want to be there. Take the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Okay, if you guys ever noticed, the rich man never asked to get out of hell. He just tries to get Lazarus into hell. I'm going to send Lazarus down there to cool my tongue. He doesn't want to get out of hell. He doesn't even expect such a thing, because it's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. That's what sin does. It turns us into these beings who want us to be our own gods. And then despite it destroying us slowly from within, we fight it and we continue to tell us it's fine. Sin is like a horrible drug addiction that goes on, and that's what hell is. So I memorized this quote from C.S. Lewis because I think he says it perfectly. It's a collection of some of his quotes. But when it comes to the doctrine of hell, it is itself a question. What are you asking God to do? To wipe out past sins and give them a fresh start? He did on Calvary. To forgive them, they don't want to be forgiven. To leave them alone, that's what hell is. There are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done. And those to whom God says, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell.
And of course, you mentioned already that's the very heart of the cross. And the Easter story is that Jesus comes to rescue us from that. Just like to finish with this question around him. So you've been a Christian for at least 15 years. You've had a YouTube channel talking about him, probably a little bit before that, obviously. What is it about this guy, Jesus, that really draws you to trust him? Like, well, what is so illuminating, what is so magnetic about him? Why, of all people, when he says, take up a cross, follow me, deny yourself, trust me, follow me, believe it. What enables you to make that step and take off any of the blindfold uncertainty that would hold you back?
Yeah, what is one of the easiest ways to identify a cult leader? They claim God told them they get multiple wives. It happens every time. We see it with Joseph Smith, Muhammad, David Koresh. It's just one of those things. God really wants the cult leaders to have multiple wives. I mean, you see this in so many other religions. Someone starts a religion, they get wealth, fame, followers, fortune, and of course, multiple wives. They get for some reason, they get everything their heart's desires. There's a place in one of the Muslim sources, the Hadith, where one of Muhammad's wives is like, wow, your Lord is really here to hasten your desires, Muhammad. You can almost read her sarcastic response even. It's kind of funny. This is not in Christianity. It's really interesting if you look at all the prophets, like Jeremiah, Isaiah. Man, they don't have good lives. I mean, like, it's just, man, things are just not going well for them, and especially with Jesus. What is he gaining in earthly desires when he came? He lived a very poor life, was constantly chased out of towns, rejected by people, and then he was humiliated and tortured and died. What did he gain? When he says, take up your cross and follow after me, he meant it. I mean, like, this is one thing when God sort of sends people to do as well. You know, they are supposed to give everything. I mean, look what Paul gave. Look what Peter gave. Look at what the early church gave. Okay? This was not a religion set up for their material gain. This was something they were convinced happened, and they were willing to die and be tortured for it. So it's actually quite interesting. So when you're asked to follow Jesus, he's not asking you to do anything that he himself would not do or has not already done for you. This is not like Muhammad, where Muhammad gets wives, wealth, and fame, and you just got to be his follower and hope you can get into heaven if you're as good as he is. This is about the creator of the universe coming down, giving everything for you so that you can experience eternal joy. There is no religion like Christianity. There is none. There's none where God gets off his throne and comes down and saves us. Now, some atheists will scoff at that. But that is the truth. And if they want to mock it, they can. Paul says this would happen in the letter to the Corinthians, that, you know, people are going to mock this. You know, it's a folly for some. You know, it just is what it is. But it's hard for people to accept that God would want to do such a thing like that for us. So, because we don't think like that. But God said, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts. He is truly loving. And you won't get that kind of love in any other religion.
And what's that experience of God's love done in your life? How's it changed you in your time following Jesus?
Yeah, this is my happy face. I don't smile.
You should have seen him before. It's gone from a frown to neutral, and by the end of his life, we'll get the edges of those lips on the upside. Can we please give a big thanks to Michael Jones? Thank you very much. All right, well, you can find him online at Inspiring Philosophy on YouTube and on TikTok. They've got a great website. And like I said, he is one of the front runners who's been doing this for a very long time. It's phenomenal video content on there that will answer many of the questions. The goal of that was just to give you tiny little tasters. That is not at all a close to fully orbed answer to any of those questions, but little things to get your minds thinking, to begin to prime conversation, and for you to start going and investigating and doing your own research. One of the benefits here at church is we have people to do that with. We're going to have morning tea now, and you can continue those conversations over coffee. It's free if you're new. If you've never been here before, you can go up to the coffee window and say, hey, I'm new. You owe me a free coffee, Dan said. And they'll make you whatever you'd like. So definitely take us up on that. But sit down at a table and talk about, hey, what stood out to you? What questions does that provoke? Where are you up to? Can we give him one more round of applause? Thanks very much, Michael. We'll let you go and sit down. Just want to close with a couple of next steps for you. Here at Ashgrove Baptist, one of our opportunities to explore the Christian faith is a program called Alpha. And Alpha is enormously helpful because you get to have a meal with people who are on the same journey. You get to watch a short video that explores the major teachings about Christianity, and then you get to ask away at your table with all of the questions that provokes for you at the people who are there with you. We would thoroughly encourage you, if you've never done Alpha before, to get along and do it. We're actually in the middle of an Alpha course right now, and while you may have missed the beginning, you can go back and watch the earlier videos and just jump in. So if you're interested in doing Alpha either now or later, there are some flyers down on the back table there. I'd really encourage you to pick one of them up or ask us here at the church about it. The second thing, we love being able to help develop rich relationships in our community. So I'm going to get Peter